I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, fussing with the neckline as I surveyed the dining room. Everything had to be perfect for Thomas's celebration dinner. The promotion he'd worked so hard for had finally come through, and I wanted this night to be special. "Vivian, honey, have you seen my blue tie?" Thomas called from upstairs. "Check the second drawer, dear," I replied, lighting the candles on the table. The flickering flames cast a warm glow across the china plates and crystal glasses. I smiled, remembering our wedding day when we'd received this set as a gift. 10 years had flown by in the blink of an eye. Thomas's footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my reverie. He appeared in the doorway, looking dashing in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Even after all these years, he still had that effect on me. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Vice President," I teased, straightening his tie. He chuckled, pulling me close. "I couldn't have done it without you, Viv. You've been my rock through it all." The doorbell chimed, interrupting our moment. "That'll be Sam and Jack," I said, giving Thomas a quick peck on the cheek before heading to answer the door. Samantha, my best friend since college, greeted me with a warm hug. "Congratulations, you two," she exclaimed, handing me a bottle of champagne. Her husband, Jack, nodded in agreement, clapping Thomas on the back as they made their way inside. As we settled around the table, the conversation flowed easily. We laughed over shared memories and toasted to new beginnings. It wasn't until dessert that I noticed something was off. Thomas's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, a small smile playing on his lips. "Everything okay?" I asked, curious about what could be so engaging. "Oh, just work stuff," he replied, tucking the phone away. But I caught the way his eyes lit up, a spark I hadn't seen in a while. Sam must have noticed too, because she shot me a questioning look. I shrugged it off, determined not to let anything dampen the evening. As our guests were leaving, Sam pulled me aside. "Viv, is everything all right with you and Thomas?" she whispered, concern etched on her face. "Of course," I replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but Jack mentioned that Thomas has been spending a lot of time with his new mentee at work. Elizabeth, I think her name is?" My stomach clenched. "I'm sure it's just part of his new responsibilities," I said, forcing a smile. But Sam's words had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Later that night, as Thomas and I cleaned up, I couldn't help but ask, "So, how's the mentoring going? With Elizabeth, right?" Thomas's hand paused mid-wipe of a plate. "It's fine," he said, his tone suddenly guarded. "She's bright, catches on quickly." "That's good," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maybe we should have her over for dinner sometime. I'd love to meet her." Thomas's response was oddly terse. "I don't think that's necessary, Viv. It's just work." As I lay in bed that night, Thomas's arm draped over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The seed of doubt Sam had planted began to grow, and I found myself wondering what other changes this promotion might bring to our lives. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundation of our marriage. The weeks following Thomas's promotion flew by in a whirlwind of late nights and business dinners. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, but it grew harder with each passing day. Thomas's phone buzzed constantly, and his eyes lit up every time he checked it. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Thomas's phone chimed on the nightstand. I hesitated for a moment before glancing at the screen. A message from Elizabeth flashed across it. "Can't wait for our lunch tomorrow. You always brighten my day." My heart sank. I placed the phone back, my hands trembling slightly. When Thomas came home that night, I couldn't help but confront him. "How was work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Busy as usual," he replied, loosening his tie. "Got a big presentation coming up." "And how's Elizabeth doing? I saw her message about lunch tomorrow." Thomas froze for a split second before recovering. "Oh, that? It's just a mentoring lunch. Nothing to worry about, Viv." But I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes. "Thomas, be honest with me. Is there something going on between you two?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Of course not. She's just a colleague. You're being paranoid, Vivian." His dismissive tone stung. "Paranoid, Thomas, you light up every time her name is mentioned. I'm not blind." "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. I'm not some hormonal teenager. I can have female friends without it meaning anything. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Friends don't make their spouses feel like this, Thomas. He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The next day, I couldn't concentrate at work. My mind kept wandering to Thomas and Elizabeth, imagining their lunch together. When I got home, I found Thomas in his study, engrossed in his laptop. "How was your day?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He barely looked up. "Fine. Busy?" "And lunch with Elizabeth?" This time he did look up, irritation clear on his face. "It was just lunch, Vivian. Drop it." But I couldn't. "You used to tell me about your day, about the people you work with. Now it's like pulling teeth to get any information out of you." Thomas slammed his laptop shut. "Maybe because you turn everything into an interrogation. I'm trying to focus on my career, Vivian. I thought you'd be supportive." "I am supportive," I protested, "but not at the expense of our marriage." He stood up abruptly. "I need some air," he muttered, brushing past me. I heard the front door slam a few moments later. Sinking into his chair, I noticed a post-it note on his desk. In neat handwriting it read, "Elizabeth, dinner reservations Friday 8 p.m. My world tilted on its axis. Dinner reservations? On a Friday night? This was more than mentoring. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed Sam's number. "Viv, what's wrong?" Sam's concerned voice came through. "It's Thomas," I choked out. I think he's having an affair with Elizabeth." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, honey, I was hoping I was wrong, but I've heard rumors at the office." My heart shattered. "What do I do, Sam?" "First, take a deep breath," she said gently. "We'll figure this out together. Why don't you come over? Jack's out of town, and I think you could use a friend right now." As I hung up, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the bookshelf. Thomas's smiling face mocked me. How had we gone from that happy couple to this? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? With a heavy heart, I grabbed my keys and headed for Sam's house, leaving behind the shattered remains of my once perfect life. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing the fine lines around my eyes that seemed to have deepened overnight. The weight of Thomas's betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, aging me beyond my years. As I applied concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder if this was why Thomas had turned to Elizabeth. The sound of the front door closing jolted me from my thoughts. Thomas was home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. "Vivian?" Thomas called out. "We need to talk." I stepped out of the bathroom, my heart pounding. "Yes, we do." Thomas was standing in the living room, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. He looked tired, but there was a strange energy about him. "I think we should discuss what's been going on," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "You mean your affair with Elizabeth?" The words came out sharper than I intended. He flinched. "It's not an affair, Vivian, but I can't deny that there's something there." I felt my world crumbling around me. "Something there?" "Thomas, you're married. To me, remember?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. "Of course I remember. But Vivian, when was the last time we really connected? When was the last time you showed any interest in my work, my ambitions?" His words hit me like a slap. "I've always supported you, Thomas. I've been here, by your side, through everything." "But that's just it," he said, his voice rising. "You've been here, but have you really been present? Elizabeth, she understands me. She's passionate about her career, about making a difference. When I'm with her, I feel alive." Each word was a dagger to my heart. "And with me, you feel, what? Dead?" Thomas sighed. "That's not what I meant. It's just... Elizabeth is so vibrant, so full of life. She reminds me of you when we first met." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So because I'm not in my 20s anymore, I'm no longer good enough for you?" "That's not fair, Vivian," Thomas protested. "It's not about age. It's about connection, about shared goals and interests." "And what about our shared life, Thomas? Our history, our plans for the future?" My voice cracked with emotion. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know if those plans fit who I am anymore, Viv. I'm changing, growing. Elizabeth challenges me in ways I never expected." I felt a surge of anger. "And I don't challenge you? Is that what you're saying?" "You used to," he said softly. "But lately it feels like we're just going through the motions. Elizabeth makes me feel alive again." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "So what are you saying, Thomas? That you want to leave me for her?" He hesitated, and in that moment of silence, I knew my world shattered completely. "I don't know what I want," he finally said, "but I can't ignore these feelings anymore." I stood there, frozen, as the reality of our situation crashed over me. This wasn't just a fleeting infatuation or a midlife crisis. This was the end of everything I thought we had built together. "I think you should leave," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked shocked. "Vivian, No," I cut him off. "I can't do this right now. I need time to think, to process. Please, just go." He nodded slowly, grabbing his jacket. As he reached the door, he turned back. "I'm sorry, Viv. I never meant for this to happen." The door closed behind him, and I collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking my body. How had we come to this? And more importantly, where did we go from here? As the tears subsided, a new emotion began to take root: determination. If Thomas thought he could just throw away our marriage for a younger model, he had another thing coming. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days after Thomas left were a blur of tears and sleepless nights. I threw myself into work, desperate for any distraction from the gaping hole in my life. But even at the hospital, surrounded by the constant bustle of patients and colleagues, I couldn't escape the crushing weight of betrayal. It was during a particularly grueling shift that I received the text that would change everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ducked into the break room to check it. "Thomas, we need to talk. I'm moving out. Can I come by tonight to get some things?" My hands shook as I read the message. This was really happening. He was leaving me for her. I managed to finish my shift, though I couldn't tell you a single thing I did. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, grief, and a growing sense of determination. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't let Thomas see me broken. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. sharp. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Thomas stood there, looking uncomfortable. "Hi, Viv. Can I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, letting him enter. He glanced around the living room, his eyes lingering on the empty spaces where his things used to be. "I've already packed most of your stuff," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's in boxes in the spare room." He looked surprised. "Oh, thanks, I guess." An awkward silence fell between us. This man, who I had loved for over a decade, now felt like a stranger in our home. "So," I finally said, "you're really doing this? Throwing away our marriage for her?" Thomas sighed. "Vivian, it's not like that. Elizabeth and I, we connect on a level that you and I haven't in years." Something inside me snapped. "Don't you dare try to justify this, Thomas. You made vows to me, for better or worse, remember? Or does that not apply when a younger, shinier model comes along?" "That's not fair," he protested. "I didn't plan for this to happen, but I can't deny my feelings anymore." I laughed bitterly. "Your feelings? What about my feelings, Thomas? Did you even consider them for a second?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "Of course I did. This isn't easy for me either, Viv." "Oh, I'm sure it's so hard for you," I spat. Poor Thomas, torn between his loyal wife and his exciting new girlfriend. However will you cope? "Vivian, please," he pleaded. "Can't we do this civilly?" I felt a surge of rage. "Civilly? You want me to be civil while you destroy everything we've built together? While you humiliate me in front of our friends, our families?" Thomas's face hardened. "I didn't come here to fight. I'll get my things and go." As he turned towards the spare room, something in me broke. "She doesn't love you, you know," I blurted out. He froze. "What?" "Elizabeth," I said, my voice shaking. "She doesn't love you. She's using you to advance her career." Thomas whirled around, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "You don't know what you're talking about. Elizabeth and I know exactly what I'm talking about," I interrupted. "I've heard things, Thomas, from people at your company. She has a reputation for latching on to successful men to climb the corporate ladder." I saw doubt flicker in his eyes, quickly replaced by anger. "You're lying. You're just jealous because she's younger, more vibrant." "More vibrant," I echoed, incredulous. "Is that what this is about? You're having a midlife crisis and I'm just collateral damage?" Thomas's face flushed. "You know what? I don't have to listen to this. I'm leaving." As he stormed towards the door, I called after him. "Go ahead, Thomas. Run to your precious Elizabeth, but don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made." The door slammed behind him. leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our once happy home. I sank to the floor, my body shaking with sobs. But as the tears subsided, a new feeling emerged, a steely resolve. If Thomas thought he could discard me so easily, he had another thing coming. It was time to fight for what was mine, and heaven help anyone who stood in my way. The morning after Thomas left, I woke up with a newfound determination. I couldn't just sit around and let my life fall apart. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. I called in sick to work for the first time in years and dialed Sam's number. "Sam, I need your help," I said as soon as she picked up. "Can you meet me for coffee?" An hour later, we were seated in a quiet corner of our favorite cafe. Sam's face was etched with concern. "Viv, honey, how are you holding up?" I took a deep breath. "I'm managing, but I need to know more about Elizabeth. You work with her, right?" Sam nodded, her expression turning guarded. "I do, but Viv, are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I have to, Sam. I need to understand what's really going on." She sighed, then leaned in closer. "All right, but you didn't hear this from me. Elizabeth, she has a reputation at the office. This isn't the first time she's gotten close to a senior executive." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Last year, she was mentored by the CFO. He left his wife, but a few months later, Elizabeth moved on to greener pastures. The poor guy's career never recovered." I felt a mix of vindication and dread. "So she's using Thomas?" Sam nodded grimly. "It looks that way. But Viv, there's more. I overheard her on the phone yesterday. She was talking to someone, I think her boyfriend, about a big promotion coming her way." My world tilted on its axis. "Boyfriend? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. She was talking about weekend plans and using pet names. It definitely wasn't Thomas she was talking to." I sat back, my mind reeling. Thomas wasn't just leaving me. He was being played for a fool. "What are you going to do?" Sam asked softly. I squared my shoulders. "I'm going to fight for my marriage." The next few days were a whirlwind. I threw myself into uncovering everything I could about Elizabeth. I scoured social media, called in favors from mutual acquaintances, and even hired a private investigator. What I discovered left me feeling sick. Elizabeth had a long-term boyfriend who worked at a competing firm. Their social media was full of loved-up photos and plans for the future. Meanwhile, she was stringing Thomas along, using him to secure a major promotion. I was mulling over this information when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Thomas. "Can we talk? I've been doing some thinking." My heart leaped. Was he having second thoughts? I quickly replied, agreeing to meet him at our favorite park the next day. As I approached our usual bench, I saw Thomas already seated, looking haggard and conflicted. He stood when he saw me, his eyes searching my face. "Vivian," he began, his voice hoarse. I've made a terrible mistake." I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "What do you mean, Thomas?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "I've been blind, Viv. Elizabeth, she's not who I thought she was." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know about her boyfriend, Thomas, and her history with executives at the company." His face crumpled. "You knew? Why didn't you tell me?" "Would you have believed me?" I asked softly. He looked away, shame written across his features. "I don't know. I've been such a fool, Viv. Can you ever forgive me?" I stood there, my emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to take him in my arms, to forgive and forget. But another part, a stronger part, held back. "I don't know, Thomas," I said finally. "You've hurt me deeply. You were ready to throw away our entire life together for a woman you barely knew." "I know," he whispered. "I'll do anything to make it right, Viv. Please, just tell me what I need to do." As I looked at him, broken and pleading, I realized I had a choice to make. Did I want to try and salvage our marriage, or was it time to walk away and start anew? The decision I made in that moment would shape the rest of my life. And as the weight of it settled on my shoulders, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, steeling myself for what was about to come. After days of internal struggle, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to confront Elizabeth face to face. The cafe where we agreed to meet was bustling with the lunch crowd. I spotted Elizabeth immediately, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit standing out among the sea of office workers. As I approached, she looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Vivian, she said, her voice cool and composed. I must admit, I was surprised when you reached out. I slid into the seat across from her, my heart pounding. Thank you for meeting me, Elizabeth. I think we have a lot to discuss. She raised an eyebrow. Do we? I was under the impression that your situation with Thomas was resolved. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. That's exactly why I'm here. I know about your boyfriend, Elizabeth, and your history with executives at the company. For a split second, her carefully crafted facade cracked. Fear flashed in her eyes before she regained her composure. I'm not sure what you're implying, Vivian. I think you know exactly what I'm implying, I said, leaning forward. You've been using Thomas to advance your career, haven't you? Just like you did with the CFO last year. Elizabeth's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos my private investigator had taken of her with her boyfriend. Care to explain these? She stared at the images, her face paling. How did you? It doesn't matter, I cut her off. What matters is that you've been playing with people's lives, Elizabeth. With my life. To my surprise, Elizabeth's shoulders sagged. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability behind her polished exterior. You don't understand, she said softly. This job, this career, it's all I have. I've had to fight tooth and nail for every opportunity. By destroying marriages? I asked incredulously. She looked away. I never meant for it to go this far with Thomas. He wouldn't take no for an answer. I thought if I played along, I could secure the promotion and then let him down gently. I felt a surge of anger. Let him down gently? Do you have any idea what you've done to our marriage? Elizabeth met my gaze, her eyes surprisingly sincere. I'm sorry, Vivian. Truly. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I didn't know how to get out of it without jeopardizing everything I've worked for. As I sat there processing her words, I realized something. Elizabeth wasn't the villain I had painted her to be. She was just a woman trying to navigate a cutthroat world, making questionable choices along the way. What are you going to do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth sighed. I don't know. If this gets out, my career is over. But I can't keep living this lie. In that moment, I made a decision that surprised even me. I won't expose you, Elizabeth, I said. But you need to come clean to Thomas. He deserves to know the truth. She nodded, relief washing over her face. I will, I promise. As we parted ways, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by a new burden. Now that I knew the truth, what was I going to do about my marriage? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Thomas's car. He was waiting for me on the porch, his face etched with concern and hope. As I walked towards him, I realized that this was it, the moment that would define our future. With each step, I felt the weight of our history, the pain of betrayal, and the faint glimmer of possibility. Vivian, Thomas said, his voice breaking, can we talk? I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever I said next would change everything. The future of our marriage hung in the balance, and the decision was mine to make. I stood on the porch facing Thomas, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of everything we'd been through, everything I'd learned, pressed down on me like a physical force. Yes, Thomas, we need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We moved inside, the familiar surroundings of our home now feeling alien and tense. Thomas sat on the edge of the couch, his posture rigid with anxiety. Vivian, I've made a terrible mistake, he began, his voice cracking. I don't know what I was thinking. Elizabeth, I held up a hand, cutting him off. I know about Elizabeth, Thomas. I know everything. His eyes widened in shock. What do you mean? I mean I know about her boyfriend, her history with executives at the company, her using you for a promotion, I said, each word deliberate and heavy. Thomas's face crumpled, a mix of shame and disbelief washing over him. How did you find out? It doesn't matter, I replied, feeling a surge of strength. What matters is that I know, and now you know too. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. God, Vivian, I've been such a fool. Can you ever forgive me? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say next. Forgiveness isn't the issue here, Thomas. The issue is trust. You were ready to throw away our entire marriage, our life together, for a fantasy. I know, he whispered, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, Viv, just tell me what I need to do. For a moment, I was tempted. The familiar pull of our shared history, the comfort of the known, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of his comparisons between Elizabeth and me. I'm sorry, Thomas, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I don't think there's anything you can do. I've made my decision. He looked at me, confusion and fear dawning on his face. What do you mean? I squared my shoulders, drawing on a well of strength I didn't know I possessed. I want a divorce, Thomas. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Thomas stared at me, shock written across his features. Divorce? He echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Vivian, please, we can work this out. I love you. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation. It's not about love anymore, Thomas. It's about respect, self-respect. And I've realized that I can't stay in a marriage where that's been so fundamentally broken. But what about our life together? Our plans? He stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. Those plans were for a different Vivian and Thomas, I replied. We're not those people anymore. As the reality of the situation sank in, Thomas's demeanor changed. Desperation gave way to anger. You can't do this, he said, his voice rising. You're throwing away years of marriage over one mistake. I stood my ground, unflinching. It wasn't just one mistake, Thomas. It was a series of choices that showed me exactly where I stood in your life, and I deserve better. You'll regret this, he spat, jumping to his feet. You're nothing without me, Vivian. Who do you think you are? His words, meant to hurt and diminish, instead filled me with a fierce determination. I'm Vivian, I said, my voice strong and clear, and I'm more than enough on my own. Thomas stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As the echo faded, I sank onto the couch, the enormity of what had just happened washing over me. Tears came then, a mix of grief for what was lost and relief for what was to come. As I sat there in the quiet of the house that had once been our home, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I, Vivian, would be the author of my own story. The road ahead would be challenging, I knew. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Because now I was fighting for myself. 1 year after I asked Thomas for a divorce, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my new blazer. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had once defined herself as Thomas's wife. She was stronger, more confident, and unapologetically herself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam. Good luck today. You've got this. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support throughout this tumultuous year. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my briefcase and headed out the door. The hospital boardroom was intimidating, filled with stern-faced executives. As the newly appointed head of nursing, I was presenting my plan to revolutionize patient care. As I began my presentation, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face at the back of the room. Thomas. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of recognition, then regret. But I didn't falter. Instead, I channeled all the strength I'd gained over the past year into my words, my vision for the future of healthcare. As I concluded, the room erupted in applause. The CEO stood up, beaming. Vivian, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. You have our full support. Elation washed over me. This was my moment, my triumph. As the room cleared out, Thomas approached hesitantly. Congratulations, Viv, he said softly. You were incredible. I nodded, maintaining my composure. Thank you, Thomas. He shifted uncomfortably. I heard about your promotion, and now this. You've really flourished. I have, I agreed, feeling a surge of pride. Thomas's face. I made a terrible mistake, Vivian. Leaving you was the biggest regret of my life. Elizabeth, she used you, I finished for him. I know, but Thomas, that's not why our marriage ended. It ended because you were willing to throw away everything we had built together. He nodded, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I know that now. Seeing you today, so confident and successful, I realized what I lost. Is there any chance we could? I held up a hand, stopping him. No, Thomas, what we had is gone. But I'm grateful for the journey, because it led me here. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped, I felt no joy in his misery. Instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. Later that evening, I met Sam for dinner to celebrate. As we clinked glasses, she grinned at me. To Vivian 2.0, I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. You know, Sam, a year ago I thought my life was over. I thought Thomas's betrayal had broken me. Sam reached across the table, squeezing my hand. But it didn't. It made you stronger. I nodded, reflecting on the journey. It did. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to being someone's wife. It was always within me, waiting to be unleashed. As we finished our meal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Elizabeth. I saw the news about your presentation. Congratulations, Vivian. What you've achieved is truly inspiring. I smiled, remembering our conversation a year ago. Elizabeth had kept her promise, coming clean to Thomas and facing the consequences of her actions. In an unexpected turn of events, we had developed a cautious friendship, bonding over our shared experiences in a male-dominated world. As Sam and I walked out of the restaurant, arm in arm, I looked up at the starry sky. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I had never dared to imagine before. You know, Sam, I said, I used to think that the best revenge would be seeing Thomas miserable. But now I realize the best revenge is living my best life. Sam grinned, giving me a playful nudge, and boy, are you living it. As we parted ways, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartbreak, but it had led me here, to this moment of triumph and self-discovery. I was Vivian, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. And this was just the beginning of my story.